I usually open with a joke, and I thought this was appropriate. Did anybody at the beginning of the summer, there was a movie with Seth Rogen called This Is the End. Did anyone see it? Nobody saw it. Well, it was hysterical. It was a hysterical film, Seth Rogen and James Franco. And the concept was that they're playing themselves, Seth Rogen and James Franco and Jonah Hill, and they're having a big party, and all of a sudden the apocalypse happens. And people are going up in blue light, and they're so clueless because they're playing themselves as vain, stupid actors that they just think it's an earthquake. They just think that they're going to be rescued because they're special and because they entertain people. And so that they mock themselves for most of the movie. But then it takes a turn which is extraordinary, that Seth Rogen wrote it and directed it with his friend. And what happens is they realize that it's the apocalypse, that the only people going up in the blue light, they're going up like this, the only people going up in the rapture are good people and are people that are actually do things for other people. And they realize that they're stuck down here and there's zombies, there's all kinds of crazy stuff, because they don't do that. So they decide to try to do teshuvah, to learn how to be unselfish. So it's amazing how deep and meaningful this crazy movie was. But what killed me was when they come to this realization, they're talking about it, and Seth Rogen goes, they're talking about that it really is the apocalypse. And he goes, so this means that there really is a God. He goes, who saw that coming? He just threw the line away. It was brilliant. Who saw that coming? It's like iPhones. Who saw that coming? So I want to focus in on the themes that have already been established, but I'm going to approach them. We all approach them our own way, but I'm going to stick with the themes. A while ago, my friend Lyle, who we just heard from, we were having a discussion about the difference between what we thought the spiritual life was when we were hippies and in our 20s, and the image we had of holiness and the image we had of enlightenment. Remember that conversation? And how utterly differently it turned out to be, right? Not like our image, because there's this image that we're going to be Buddha. We're going to get enlightened, and then nothing will bother us. And I think that's an image that many people have, that you reach this certain stage, and then you just walk on water. So we were saying that doesn't seem to be the case, right? So I became interested in not the high points, but of the low points. I became interested in the darkness. Now you see you see what we were talking about yesterday with death and what we was all this discussing. I became interested in myself. Like, okay, there seems to be not going away. I'm not as bad as I was. I get that something has changed over 45 years of spiritual work. I'm not as bad as I was, right? She even knows me. So I'm not as bad as I was. So something has changed, has lightened up. But there's still, I'm a human being, and I'm in the flow of, I get depressed, I get frightened, I become anxious, I get angry, I can be petty. Do you understand? In other words, so I'm saying, well, there seems to be no end to this, no matter how much I prayed for it year after year after year. There seems to be no end to this. So let me look into this. What is all this? And what is the redemption of this? What's the possible redemption of all this stuff? Now, to explain this, I want to share a teaching of my friend Rabbi Scott Shapiro. This was his teaching on Pesach. And Rabbi Scott is remarkable. He's a psychologist, and he was a Zen monk for 5 years in Kyoto, Japan. He's really a remarkable person. And his teaching is that he was saying that he was relating the Pharaoh not to anything evil, but to this inner self, or we could call it ego too, that he calls the caretaker self. So in other words, as children, as young babies, something happens to us. There's some disharmony in our family life with our parents, with our mother, with our father. And we become famished, even at that age. We become shocked. And he says what happens then is a caretaker self forms. But it's not just one, it's a committee. So there's all voices that get us through life. No, do it this way, maneuver this way, be nice to this person, kiss this person, don't do the other one. So no, really, and we would be useless without this caretaker self. We wouldn't know how to maneuver this life. But he said what happens is the soul, which Reb Drew spoke about, the soul which doesn't come from any of that. It's not from here. It's not from this world. It's utterly fresh. It's pure. It's from God. The soul becomes entangled up in the dramas of the caretaker self and its basic need to survive. Basically, everything to it feels like its survival is threatened. So the only hope seems to be, what Lyle spoke about was the letting go or the surrender. The surrender out of this mechanism, the surrender out of this dynamic of the caretaker self and its life and its relationship with life into something else. So what I noticed is that in most people, there's suffering, there's irritation, there's being annoyed with someone else. There's maybe someone that you work with that you can't stand and doesn't like me. Or, do you know what I'm saying? Or then there's physical illness. Then there's worried about our children. Then there's, you know what I'm saying? There's so many sufferings that we're prone to. And there's no way out of it. You know, we don't have the monk's way. We don't cancel out of life. We stay in. So what I noticed, and I especially noticed after 20 years of working at the Jewish Home for the Aged, that there's 3 possible ways to deal with suffering on any level. It could be a minor irritation. It could be a bad news from a doctor. It could be anything. And the first 2 are the normative ones. One is either an external oy vey, or an internal oy vey. So, and we fall apart. In other words, like, panic, hysteria, oy vey. Then there's another one, which I've also seen at the Jewish Home from people who are very powerful, especially the women. And it's a certain stoicism. It's like, yeah, a meteor could come. I know a woman that she's in a wheelchair. A meteor could come and crash into her, and she would get up and say, okay, where's lunch? In other words, like, there's a certain starker way to get through these sufferings. Stoicism, right? Which is a lot better than the other, because it doesn't infect other people. So you really, is a great honor in that when you see people bearing their suffering and not putting it out there. You know, grace under fire is quite something to see. But now, what Lyle was speaking about is something else. There's a third way that is neither of those 2. And the surrender is the soul's realization that it doesn't really belong to this field of the caretaker self and all its knowledge and all of its good and bad, not just bad. Understand, it's good too. It knows how to keep a job. So it's quite important. But the soul says, I'm from elsewhere. And the soul surrenders, lets go, and is now in a different realm. Now, this stuff goes on. It's not like it stops, all of a sudden we're happy forever. But at least for that moment, there's freedom. Because one is part of a bigger picture at that moment. One belongs to the family of Israel, the family of humanity, the family of God. We're part of something. We have a right to have this freedom. It's our birthright to be a soul free, unencumbered from all this. Now, surrender doesn't mean like we let people walk all over us or anything like that. In a state of surrender, one may, say what needs to be said. But there's a freedom because, and I want to give you like concrete examples, okay? Right? So here's a concrete example. So I was working with the surrender for about a year. And then last November, I come home from work and I see the door to my house is open. I said, gee, is my cleaning person coming today? No. I go in, wrecked, robbed, right? Now, but I was ready because I had been working with this surrender. You see, you start with it's like the gym. You don't start with 500-pound weights, you start with 5 pounds. So I've been working with irritation, anger, fear, anxiety, all these things. So now, and I was feeling a joy, and we'll get back to Reb Drew. I was feeling a joy at, wow, I can still say yes to God even though life is saying no to me. Do you see that? Life is saying no, but inside myself, I'm still saying yes to God. I'm not oivei, I'm not stoic, I'm letting God have this energy. I'm saying, you see, now, another thing Reb Drew has been pointing out to us, he keeps talking about this point in ourselves, right? This point. This point is free, and it's our link with our soul root. You see, this is another thing I discovered. So I just want to tell you, I walked in the house, and my normative caretaker self, and selves, because it isn't one, panicked. Oh, what am I going to do? Oh, what if they come back? All the fears that happen when you get robbed because you feel violated. And what did they take? And they threw my computer on the floor and all this kind of unnecessarily vicious, right? And yet, something in me jumped at this chance to offer it to God. Because it wasn't going to change. I was already robbed. So why should I let the thief steal my inner life too? The thief has already stolen my outer life. But why should he steal my inner life? So Shakespeare has a line where he says in one of his plays, the robbed who can smile steals something from the thief. So I called Lisa because I didn't have, my computer was gone, and Lisa came over, and I just instinctively, I got out my Havdalah candles, and I lit them, and I just went through the house to get their vibe out of the house. I didn't have incense, but I would have done it with incense if I had it. And we went for a beautiful dinner. I got dressed up, and it was an extraordinary day. It was an extraordinary day, and it stayed. That the power of it stayed with me, because no matter what happens to us, we're not alone. So I want to tell you what that led to. Then it got rather more extraordinary. As time went by, I became aware more and more that what I call my soul, and because we think we're separate, I think I'm a Paul Wolff. You see, because we think we're separate, we see everything as separate, including the soul. Oh, and we have a separate soul. Well, I learned that we don't have a separate soul. It's part of a soul root. Every one of us comes from a root, and there's other souls with us. We're not alone. None of us in here is alone. We feel alone sometimes. We get alienated, but you're not alone. We have friends. We have God, and we have our soul root friends. And something, if you will allow me to say things that are a little strange, that may sound a little odd, but I want to share them with you. I don't even know if I'll be here next year. So I want to share the truth of my life. So what happened was I began to have this sense of being with other souls, with God, not alone. And then my movement through life is really based on compassion, based especially on helping people who are suffering terribly, whether it was at the halfway house for addicts or at the home for the last 20. People who are up against the wall and have nowhere to go, I tend to want to be with them. For whatever reason, that's my soul is interested in that. And also as you probably saw on Rosh Hashanah, a very more than passing interest in the Shoah. Even though I'm not the children of survivors, I think I was there on some level. I don't know how, because it's so important to me, the Shoah. And I started to meet people and beings that were trapped, that their faith, their point, was trapped still in that darkness. In other words, the crime that was committed against our people all those years ago continues in the sense that many souls have completely lost their faith in God and lost their trust in God, understandably. And I felt I was part of a team that was a rescue unit, and that we were going into these very dark places without fear and just saying, come, we're going to go back. Not forcing anything, just inviting souls to return to God. And the joy of that return, I would go through anything, fire and water, just to witness that again and again, the souls returning to God in joy, and God restoring to them what was taken from them. So I know this is kind of strange, but I'm sharing it with you. So this compassion, which has been this sort of, for the past 35 years, a big thing in my life. So I came back to Lyle's discussion about enlightenment. And it's like, wow, I wasn't expecting anything like this. I thought I'd just be blissed out. No. So there's suffering, but it's not my suffering, it's our suffering. So we still always be working with suffering, working with healing, working with tikkun olam, working to help the world, working for peace. But it's ours, not me. It's the shared tikkun olam.